This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Sahone, and in this video I'm continuing with my Edge of Eternities limited set review. I've already looked at all the cards in the main set, but there are some other cards that can show up in play boosters too that I still need to cover. First, there's a bonus sheet called Stellar Sights, all of which are reprints of non-basic lands. These cards aren't quite as common as previous bonus sheets have been. In Final Fantasy, we had a bonus sheet card in 1 and 3 packs, and there have been some sets where there's a bonus sheet card in every pack. In this set, there's only one every 8 packs or so. But that does still mean you're definitely going to see some of them at the pre-release. There are also 10 special guests in this set, all of which are incredibly rare, showing up in only 1.8% of play boosters. As usual, as I evaluate each of these cards for limited, in other words draft and sealed, I'll punctuate each evaluation with a letter grade. If you're new to my set reviews and unsure of what my letter grades mean, you can find a link in the description. I also want to remind you that there are some set review related perks for being a channel member or a patron. During preview season, you get access to my ongoing set notes, which are basically the rough draft of my set review. And at the end of the set review, you'll get a spreadsheet with all of my grades. If either of those perks interest you, check out the description where you can find out how to support the channel using one of those methods. Alright, without further ado, let's take a look at the bonus sheets in Edge of Eternities. And we'll be starting with the Stellar Sights, the first of which is Ancient Tomb. It taps for 2 colorless and does 2 damage to you. So this is a powerhouse in the Eternal formats, and one of the strongest lands ever printed. Getting 2 mana out of a single land is insane, and it's pretty good in limited too, though it is sometimes hard to find places to spend the mana. Like, as far as late game top decks go, it's a pretty miserable one. Taking 2 damage every time you do it can add up in a hurry too. The mana boost is still really nice though. It's the kind of thing that gives you a big enough advantage that you can kill your opponent before it really matters. So I don't think you're ever cutting this from a deck. I'm giving it a B-. Next up, it's Blast Zone. It enters with a charge counter on it. It can tap for colorless. You can pay XX and tap it to put X charge counters on it. And you can pay 3 generic and tap it and sacrifice it to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on this land. This was fine when we saw it in both War of the Spark and the Brothers' War. Having a land that can destroy some permanents is nice, but the effect is symmetrical and takes some significant time to set up in most cases. It's also not great for your mana base. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Blink Moth Nexus. It can tap for colorless. You can pay 1 generic to make it a 1/1 Blink Moth artifact creature with flying until end of turn, and you can pay 1 generic and tap it, and target Blink Moth creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Creature lands are great, and this one becomes an artifact creature, which is extra relevant in this set. You'd be surprised how often just having this little land around allows you to continually pressure your opponent. Being basically immune to sorcery speed removal and the like is a big deal too, giving it a B. Next up, it's Bonder's Enclave, which can tap for colorless, and you can pay 3 generic and tap it to draw a card, activate only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. This was pretty good last time we saw it. Of course, that was also a set with a prominent 4 or greater theme, and this set doesn't have one. Still, if you have enough high power creatures, this is a great way to spend your mana in the late game, and I think it has enough upside to justify playing it despite the damage it does to your mana base, giving it a B-. Next up, it's Cascading Cataracts. It's indestructible, can tap for colorless, and you can pay 5 generic and tap it to add 5 mana in any combination of colors. This is not good in limited. It's not good at producing mana with either of its abilities. Only tapping for colorless is a liability, and while it can eventually produce colored mana, all it does is filter that mana, and you effectively pay like 6 mana to get 5 back because you have to tap 5 lands and this. That's just not something you need to be doing in limited. It's just not a good land. Giving it an F. Next up, it's Cathedral of War. It enters tapped. It has Exalted, which means whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and it can tap for colorless. So only tapping for colorless is enough of a problem for your mana base. Having a land that also enters tapped is a big problem. Having Exalted on a land can be nice, as it can improve your attacks, although there are also a decent chunk of situations where you'd still rather attack with everything, so this card doesn't really do anything. The entering tapped and mana limitations make this hard to get behind when the upside is so small, giving it a D+. Next up, it's Celestial Colonnade. It enters tapped, can tap for white or blue, and you can pay 3 generic, a white, and a blue, and until end of turn it becomes a 4/4 white and blue elemental creature with flying and vigilance. It's still a land. So this whole mega cycle of creature lands from original Zendikar and Oath of the Gatewatch are on this bonus sheet, and they're some of the best cards on it. They're all just super good. They might enter tapped, but they fix for 2 different colors of mana and become very real threats when you need them to. The Colonnade smashing in for 4 at a time and having Vigilance so that you can still use it as mana is pretty great. Having a land that you'd play 100% of the time in blue-white decks turn into a legitimate threat on almost any board is just bonkers. It's a B+. Next up, it's Contested War Zone. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, that creature's controller gains control of this land, and it can tap for colorless. You can pay 1 generic and tap it, and attacking creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn. The fact you completely lose this land when your opponent hits you is brutal, making it especially awful when you're behind, since your opponent is likely to be able to make more use of that ability. The upside here really isn't worth the massive downside. Sure, +1/+0 to your whole board for only 1 mana is a decent deal, but not so much that I want to risk running a card that's bad for my mana base and can give my opponent a big advantage, giving it an F. Next up, it's Creeping Tar Pit. It enters tapped, can tap for blue or black, and you can pay 1 generic, a blue, and a black, and until end of turn it becomes a 3/2 blue and black elemental creature. It's still a land, it can't be blocked this turn. This is another one of those Zendikar lands, and it's great too. It might not be as big as the Colonnade, but it's pretty cheap to animate and entirely unblockable, so it represents a very real threat, just like the Colonnade does. I'm giving it a B+. Next up, it's Crystal Quarry, which is a land that can tap for colorless, and you can pay 5 generic and tap it to add 1 mana of each color. It's kind of silly they put this and Cascading Cataracts on this bonus sheet. They're not identical, but they're very, very similar cards, and they're both bad and limited for the same reasons. It's an F. Next up, it's Deserted Temple. It taps for colorless, so you can pay 1 generic and tap it to untap target land. Untapping lands is rarely meaningful and limited. It's not like you have Gaia's Cradle or Tolarian Academy lying around, although there are those 2 planet lands in the main set that can do a bad impression of those cards, but still, this basically doesn't do anything 99.9% of the time, and it's bad for your mana base. It's an F. Next up, it's Dust Bowl. It taps for colorless. You can pay 3 generic, tap it, and sacrifice a land to destroy target non-basic land. Destroying lands in Limited is rarely viable, especially when restricted to only non-basics. It's true this set will have a significant number of non-basics, partly because of this bonus sheet, but having to give up a land and spend 3 mana to take out a non-basic land just isn't a relevant effect very often, and even when it is, it's not usually worth using until the late game, and at that point it mostly doesn't matter. This is an F. Next up, it's Echoing Deeps. It has the Cave subtype, and you can have it enter tapped as a copy of any land in a graveyard, except it's a cave in addition to its other types, and it taps for colorless. I think this has some potential in this format's graveyard decks. If you've got enough non-basics worth copying, like creature lands and stuff, and you're good at self-mill, this can probably make the cut sometimes, since its floor will at least be that it's a land that can produce mana of a color you need, but there are still times where it whiffs, and it's even an enters trigger, so if you have to run it out earlier so that you don't miss a land drop, it's just going to be a terrible land. You do also get access to your opponent's graveyard, but I still think it's a D-. Next up, it's Eldrazi Temple. It can tap for colorless, or it can tap for 2 colorless, but you can spend that mana only to cast colorless Eldrazi spells or activated abilities of colorless Eldrazi. This set has literally 1 Eldrazi, and that's not enough for this land to be worthwhile, as 99.9% of the time it'll just be worse than a basic land. It's an F. Next, it's Endless Sands. It comes with the Desert subtype, and you can tap it for colorless. You can also pay 2 generic and tap it to exile target creature you control, and you can pay 4 generic, tap it, and sacrifice it to return each creature card exiled with this land to the battlefield under its owner's control. This can be kind of cute since you can exile a bunch of your stuff to protect it and then return those things later in the game, but it asks for lots of mana to be available for the abilities, and they are still too narrow overall. Most of the time it's only worth exiling your own creature if it would have died anyway, because it's way too slow at rebuying enters triggers and stuff, so I think it's a D-. Next up, it's Gemstone Caverns. It's a legendary land, and if it's in your opening hand and you're not the starting player, you may begin the game with Gemstone Caverns on the battlefield with a luck counter on it. If you do, exile a card from your hand, and you can tap it for colorless, but if Gemstone Caverns has a luck counter on it, instead add 1 mana of any color. If you're the starting player, this is really bad. But if you aren't, well, it's kind of like you mulligan in order to get a mana boost, and you will have 2 mana on turn 1. That's like not a small thing that can really help you out. And it's worth mulliganing to do that. One thing I do want to note, I've seen a lot in the comments as I've been doing the set review, is that if you exile a card with Warp with this, for example, you can't cast it as if you warped it earlier. It has to get exiled by the Warp mechanic in order for you to cast it from exile later. You can't just cast any card with Warp from exile. So you can't really overcome the card disadvantage this gives you, even with a card with Warp. So keep that in mind. But I still think this is actually a playable land. You do need to side it out of your deck in a situation where you know you're the starting player. Like, you don't want this in your deck if you're the starting player because it's just a bad land. But if you're not the starting player, it does give you a pretty legitimate advantage, and one that, like I said, is worth mulliganing for in most games. I'm giving this a C+. Next up, it's Grove of the Burn Willows. It taps for colorless, or it can tap for red or green, and each opponent gains 1 life. This is really good fixing since it always enters untapped, and you don't have to tap it and let your opponent gain life if you only need the colorless mana. And giving your opponent life with your land isn't optimal. This isn't a set with ways to punish your opponent for gaining life, but it's definitely worth the downside to have a land that's so good for your mana base, giving it a B-. Next up, it's High Market. It can tap for colorless, and you can tap it and sack a creature to gain 1 life. So this is a free sacrifice outlet, but it's rarely worth giving up a creature to only gain 1 life. That said, there are reasons to sacrifice stuff in this format, especially in Black-Red, which is the deck that's the most into Void, a mechanic that pays you off for having things leave the battlefield, and this gives you a way to do that. There are also some straight-up sacrifice payoffs in Black-Red, so I think in that deck this is actually playable if you get there on having enough expendable things and enough bonuses for sacrificing things like Void, but I think it's an F in most decks and a C in that kind of deck. Next up, it's Hissing Quagmire. It enters tap, can tap for black or green, and you can pay 1 generic, a black, and a green, and it becomes a 2/2 black and green elemental creature with Death Touch until end of turn. It's still a land. So here's the black-green creature land. It's not quite as intimidating when it becomes a creature as like the Tar Pit or Colonnade are, as a 2/2 Death Touch isn't going to be that great at pressuring your opponent, but it does mean this is a land that can potentially trade for their best creature, along with all the usual creature land upside, giving it a B. Next up, it's Inkmoth Nexus, which can tap for colorless, and you can pay 1 generic to have it become a 1/1 Phyrexian Blinkmoth artifact creature with flying and infect until end of turn. It's still a land. So this is the Phyrexianized version of the other Nexus we saw earlier, and honestly, it's going to be a little worse on average than Blinkmoth Nexus is, because this set doesn't have a significant enough poison theme for this to really win that way. It does get interesting with stats boosts and stuff, but in Limited, you'd much rather just do damage the usual way than give your opponent counters. But it's still a land that can become an artifact and a creature. It also does damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, so blocking something with it even has some value. So it's still pretty good, just not as good as Blinkmoth is in Limited, giving it a B-. Next up, it's Inventor's Fair. It's a legendary land. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain a life. It taps for colorless, and you can pay 4 generic, tap it, and sacrifice it to tutor up an artifact card and put it into your hand. Activate only if you control 3 or more artifacts. All the decks in this format are going to be capable of sometimes getting value out of this, and some of them will be really good at it. The ones that are more focused on artifacts, like blue-black, will be really good at getting value out of this. Being able to tutor up whatever artifact is left in your deck that's your best artifact can sometimes be really powerful, and the incidental life gain doesn't hurt either. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Lava Claw Reaches. It enters tapped, can tap for black or red, and you can pay 1 generic, a black, and a red, and until end of turn, it becomes a 2/2 black and red elemental creature token with X. This creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn. It's still a land. So this creature land can hit super hard when there's nothing standing in the way, but its baseline is pretty underwhelming, and it doesn't have any evasion. It is kind of interesting as a land that can be used to station, though, since its power can potentially be really high. I'm giving it a B. Next, it's Lotus Field. It has hexproof. It enters tapped. When it enters, you sacrifice 2 lands, and you can tap it to add 3 mana of any one color. So this is amazing in 60-card formats, especially Pioneer, where it powers a whole deck, but it's tough to do anything special with it in Limited. Having to give up lands kind of makes it a wash since it only produces 3 mana, and there aren't that many ways to untap it in the format. That's where this land gets really interesting, when you can untap it. But even then, you really need stuff to spend the mana on and a bunch of untap effects, and those two things are highly unlikely to come together in Limited. This is an F. Next up, it's Lumbering Falls, which is a land that enters tapped, and it can tap for green or blue, and you can pay 2 generic, a green and a blue, and until end of turn, it becomes a 3/3 green and blue elemental creature with hexproof. So hexproof on a creature land is pretty sweet. They are already largely immune to sorcery speed removal just because they're generally only going to be creatures on your turn in most cases. And this makes it virtually immune to all removal because it can't be targeted when it's a creature. The creature you get is kind of underwhelming. It's just a 3/3, but still big enough to be relevant on most boards, giving it a B. Next up, it's Mana Confluence, which is a land. You can tap it and pay a life to add 1 mana of any color. This offers amazing fixing and nothing else, but a land that enters untapped and can tap for any color of mana is really strong and limited, and paying the life is well worth the downside. It's a B-. Next up, it's Meteor Crater, which you can tap and choose a color of a permanent you control and add 1 mana of that color. It's pretty annoying that this can't produce any mana at all until you have a colored permanent in play. At some point, it's going to be able to produce both of your main colors of mana, but the downside of having a blank text box when you play it early is pretty disastrous because sometimes you have to run lands out like that, and it's not good at helping you splash a third color either, since you aren't going to have your third color card in play most of the time. I think it's a D. Next up, it's Mirror Pool. It enters tapped and can tap for colorless. You can pay 2 generic and a colorless and tap it and sacrifice it to copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, and you can pay 4 generic and a colorless and tap it and sacrifice it to create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. This land might enter tapped and only produce colorless, but it does have some very real upside that can allow you to grind out wins in longer games. However, this format doesn't really have any built-in ways to produce the colorless mana you need. In fact, there are only 2 cards that do it in the whole set. There is more of it on this bonus sheet as we've seen, but so few of those cards are going to get opened that you can't rely on the bonus sheet to give you ways to produce colorless mana, and that really holds this card back, because if you don't have regular access to these activated abilities, it's just a land that's horrible for your mana base that enters tap, so it's an F in a set that just doesn't have colorless mana. Next up, it's Mutavault. It taps for colorless, and you can pay 1 generic, and it becomes a 2/2 creature with all creature types until end of turn. It's still a land. This is another nice creature land. It doesn't have evasion or anything, but it animates for a very reasonable cost. It would be better in a set that has a prominent typal theme, but that's not really going on at all in this set. There's like 1 Kavu payoff and maybe a handful of other payoffs for creature types, but there's nowhere near enough of them for this card to be more than just a land that can turn into a 2/2. The good news is that makes for a pretty good card. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Mystifying Maze. It can tap for colorless, and you can pay 4 generic and tap it to exile target attacking creature an opponent controls. At the beginning of the next end step, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. This isn't very good for limited. It's tempting to imagine this blanking attacks, but because this is on the board, your opponent knows it's coming and can play around it quite easily, like by attacking with any of their mini creatures that likely have an enters trigger. The ability is also super expensive for what it is, and it hurts your mana in a big way, so I think it's just an F. Next up, it's Needle Spires, which is a land that enters tapped and can tap for red or white, and you can pay 2 generic, a red and a white, and it becomes a 2/1 red and white elemental creature with double strike until end of turn. So a 2/1 double strike is relevant on almost any board, and can get particularly nasty when you're holding on to tricks, and before you feel like animating it, it's great for your mana, like all of these are, giving it a B. Next up, it's Nesting Grounds. It taps for colorless, and you can pay 1 generic and tap it to move a counter from target permanent you control onto another target permanent, activate only as a sorcery. Moving counters has some relevance in this set. The green-white deck in the format is a +1/+1 counter deck, and the spacecraft use charge counters, but only moving one at a time is super slow, even for a relatively low cost, and this is another one of these lands that's just bad for your mana base, and it can't overcome that problem. I think it's a D. Next, it's Petrified Field. It can tap for colorless, or you can tap it and sacrifice it to return target land card from your graveyard to your hand. This activated ability is rarely worth using since your lands aren't likely to be all that powerful, even with this bonus sheet, and giving up a land to get another one back isn't particularly useful when you're usually getting back basics. This just looks like an F to me. Next up, it's Plaza of Heroes. It can tap for colorless. It can also tap for 1 mana of any color, but you can spend that mana only to cast a legendary spell. And it can also tap for 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control. And you can pay 3 generic, tap it, and exile this land to make target legendary creature hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. You know, if we'd seen this on the Final Fantasy bonus sheet, it would have been an okay card, at least because there were so many legendaries. This set doesn't have nearly as many. There are only a handful of them at lower rarities, I think 7 at uncommon or lower, and they're all gold cards, so you're not that likely to be playing all of them. So this means you're rarely tapping into this card's actual power, and that's not worth making your mana really bad. I'm giving it an F. Next up, it's Power Depot, an artifact land that enters tapped, can tap for colorless, and it can tap for 1 mana of any color, but you can spend that mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. And it has modular 1, which means it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, you can put its +1/+1 counter on target artifact creature. So this is a land that comes with artifact typing, and that means it has a bit of value in the format, even if it does enter tapped and only produces colorless for your non-artifacts. Modular is okay to have, but getting access to that counter isn't very easy, although there are a few cards that allow you to sacrifice lands for value and artifacts for value, and that's where this will feel particularly good. But I'm not confident that playing this is better than just running a basic land in most decks. I'm giving it a D+. Next up, it's Raging Ravine. It enters tapped, can tap for red or green, and you can pay 2 generic, a red and a green, and until end of turn it becomes a 3/3 red and green elemental creature with, whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's still a land. So this begins as a 3/3, which isn't amazing, but it gets better every time it attacks, and it snowballs in a big way. I'm giving it a B+. Next up, it's Reflecting Pool. It can tap for 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. This is too reliant on your other lands to be that good, since it means that it isn't ever going to give you your second color of mana when you really need it. When you do have both types of lands you need, it can help you produce multiples of those colors, which is nice, but the limitations here are significant, giving it a C-. Next up, it's Scavenger Grounds. It has a desert subtype, can tap for colorless, and you can pay 2 generic, tap it, and sacrifice a desert to exile all graveyards. So this format does not have a massive graveyard theme. There's really only one color pair that's super into the graveyard in black-green, and black-red is kind of interested in the graveyard, but it's not all about it, and there's not a major mechanic in the set that allows you to do stuff out of the graveyard either. So this isn't the greatest set for this to show up in. There would be some sets where this would be worth main decking because there's such a graveyard theme in the set, you know, like Innistrad sets or Duskmourn. That's not really the case here, so that makes this a sideboard card since it's bad at producing mana and its effect is irrelevant against a lot of opponents. But if you're playing one of those really graveyard-oriented decks, it's going to be a pretty quality card for you. So I think it's an F in your main deck, but a C out of the sideboard. Next up, it's Shambling Vent. It enters tapped, can tap for white or black, and you can pay 1 generic, a white, and a black, and until end of turn it becomes a 2/3 white and black elemental creature with lifelink. It's still a land. Yet another nice creature land. This one doesn't have an incredible body, but it does have lifelink, which makes it difficult for you to not get some value out of it, giving it a B. Next up, it's Stirring Wildwood. Enters tapped, can tap for green or white, and you can pay 1 generic, a green, and a white, and until end of turn it becomes a 3/4 green and white elemental creature with reach. So this is another good one. It offers significant size, and its ability to block flyers can be extra sneaky when your opponent isn't paying attention to your lands, giving it a B. Next up, it's Strip Mine, which can tap for colorless, and you can tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target land. So this is an incredibly strong card, one of the best lands of all time, and perhaps the best land destruction card ever printed, but it's typically not good in Limited, mostly because giving up your own land to destroy one of theirs isn't meaningful most of the time, because lands on average just aren't strong enough in Limited. That said, there is one really nasty thing you can do with the Mine in this format. If you play the 4-mana 2/4 that lets you cast lands from your graveyard, and lets you play an extra land each turn, you can use the Mine to destroy 2 lands every turn, at which point it becomes completely absurd, and land destruction does start to matter when you're doing that much of it. Now, that other card is a rare, and you shouldn't count on pulling it off, but if you have a copy of that creature, and especially if you have 2, Strip Mine suddenly becomes worth it. It's going to be hard not to want to play Strip Mine in that situation, but it is a combo with only a single rare in the format, and I don't think that quite warrants a build-around grade, so I'm just giving it a D. Next up, it's Sunken Citadel. It has the Cave subtype, enters tapped, and as it enters, you choose a color. It can tap for 1 mana of the chosen color, and you can tap it to add 2 mana of the chosen color. Spend this mana only to activate abilities of land sources. So this is mostly just a good source of fixing. Like, if it was only a land that has you choose a color and then taps for mana of that color, it'd be like a C or a C+. Its second ability won't come up a ton, but because of the bonus sheet, it's not impossible for you to have some lands to use that ability on. Like, it's good at helping you animate all these creature lands, for example. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Swarm Yard. It's a land that can tap for colorless, and you can also tap it to regenerate target insect, rat, spider, or squirrel. The only one of these creature types that is in this set is insect, but there are a decent number of them, including 8 at common, so I think this is actually worth running in the right deck. Those insects are most concentrated in black-green, so if you're in a deck with those colors and you have 5 or more insects, which I think is doable, you'll be running this. But I think it's an F in your typical deck, which doesn't have more than 1 or 2 creatures that it can regenerate, But if you have a good number of insects, it's probably a C+. Regeneration is really strong when you don't have to pay any mana for it. Next up, it's Terrain Generator, which is a land that can tap for colorless, and you can pay 2 generic and tap it to put a basic land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So this kind of effect is bad and limited because you rarely have extra random basic lands in your hand to play. Even in the early game, it maybe gives you one extra land that gives you a bit of a boost for like a second, but that advantage quickly diminishes because as soon as you don't hit a land drop, things go back to how they were, and at that point the ability is never useful again. It does give you an instant speed way to trigger landfall, but I still think it's a D-. Next up, it's Thespian Stage, which can tap for colorless, and you can pay 2 generic and tap it, and it becomes a copy of target land, except it has this ability. Copying lands isn't going to be useful very often in Limited, although it does mean this land can produce more than just colorless mana, but having to spend the mana to get there is a pretty big problem. If you end up with a few of the best lands on this bonus sheet, it probably becomes worth playing, but I don't see that happening very often. It does also let you copy your opponent's lands, which does make it a little broader, but it's still not very good in Limited. I'm giving it a D. And our last card from the Stellar Sights bonus sheet is Wandering Fumarole. It enters tapped, can tap for blue or red, and you can pay 2 generic, a blue and a red, and until end of turn it becomes a 1/4 blue and red elemental creature with pay 0, switch this creature's power and toughness until end of turn. It's still a land. So we're finishing off with another one of these good creature lands. This one can hit hard when it needs to and plays defense well when it needs to as well. I'm giving it a B. All right, let's move now to the special guests. These are 10 reprints with special card frames meant to make them look like retro science fiction pulp magazines. Remember, these are even rarer than a bonus sheet with only 1.8% of packs containing them. And the first of these is Deafening Silence, an enchantment that costs 1 white mana, and each player can't cast more than 1 non-creature spell each turn. This is terrible in Limited. You go down a card for a symmetrical effect that rarely matters since people playing more than 1 non-creature spell a turn in Limited isn't exactly commonplace. It's an F. Next up, it's Robe of Stars, which for 1 generic and a white is an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +0/+3, and it also gives the creature the ability to phase out for 1 generic and a white, and the equip cost is 1 generic. So this is a good way to protect your creature, but cards like this that are almost purely protection don't fare very well in Limited since the power level of your creatures is low, and protecting the typical Limited creature isn't worth a whole card. Like, you'd much rather have a 2-mana 2/2 most of the time than this. It is an artifact, and its effect isn't irrelevant, so it's probably going to make the cut sometimes, but I think it's a D. Next up, it's Nexus of Fate, which for 5 generic and 2 blue is an instant that says take an extra turn after this one. If this card would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal this card and shuffle it into its owner's library instead. So taking an extra turn is really strong, even when it costs 7, and in Limited, the chances of you drawing this thing again are kind of reasonable. It's too expensive to be insanely strong, though. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Paradox Haze, which is an enchantment aura with enchant player, and it costs 2 generic and a blue, and it says at the beginning of enchanted player's first upkeep each turn, that player gets an additional upkeep step after this step. It's very difficult to consistently take advantage of giving yourself another upkeep trigger. Mostly, you're going to use up this card and it's never going to do anything, and even if it does give you like 1 more trigger, you're still not really at a point where you feel good about having spent this card. This is a kind of card where casting it will just feel like you mulliganed for no reason, so I think it's an F. Next up, it's Darkness, which for 1 black mana is an instant, and it says prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Fogs never play well in Limited. You go down a card for an effect that only delays the inevitable in most cases. People always look at these and they imagine the scenario where their opponent alpha strikes and then they cast this and prevent all the damage and then they destroy their opponent on the backswing. But those situations need so many things to line up for a card like this to actually be relevant that it just doesn't happen enough for this to be a card that's ever worth running. It's an F. Next up, it's Magus of the Moon, which for 2 generic and a red is a human wizard. It's a 2/2, and non-basic lands are basic mountains. Nerfing non-basic lands isn't meaningful in Limited, and this has horrible stats. It's another F. Next up, it's Burgeoning, which for 1 green mana is an enchantment, and it says whenever an opponent plays a land, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So if you play this on turn 1, there is some potential for serious ramp, but you do need to have the lands, which is not guaranteed, and you'll find that you quickly run out of them. And it's a pretty awful card from the mid-game on, so yeah, this is another F. Next up, it's Green Sun Zenith, which for an X and a green is a sorcery, and you search your library for a green creature card with mana value X or less, put it onto the battlefield, and then you shuffle Green Sun Zenith into its owner's library. Well, it looks like we're going to break our string of Fs at least, although it's not like this is incredible and limited either. Tutoring something up directly to the battlefield is good, but keep in mind it's restricted to green creatures. But if you're playing green, you probably have plenty of those. The Zenith does mean you overpay by 1 for whatever creature you grab, but it's worth the cost for that flexibility. I'm giving it a B-. Next, it's Sliver Overlord, which costs 1 of each color of mana for a 7/7 legendary Sliver mutant. And you can pay 3 generic and search your library for a Sliver card, reveal that card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Or you can pay 3 generic to gain control of target Sliver. This set has 1 card in it at rare that makes slivers, and this can't even tutor it up because it's not actually a sliver. It's an artifact that makes slivers. This is just a very hard to cast 5 mana 7/7, and that's nowhere near worth it. It's an F. And our last card from the special guests is Warping Whale, which costs 1 generic and a colorless for an instant, and you have 3 choices. You can exile target creature with power toughness 1 or less, you can counter a sorcery spell, or you can create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token. It has sacrifice this token, add colorless. So this card's actually pretty decent when it shows up in a format that has colorless mana, but because this set has so little, you won't be able to cast this very often, so it's another F. Alright, so those are all of the cards that will show up on occasion in your booster packs, the Stellar Sights bonus sheet and the special guests. As usual, there were a lot of Fs. That's usually how these go because a lot of these reprints are more intended for Commander players, but I am really excited that they are giving us all of those dual lands because those are all really fun and really powerful. So that does it for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you're caught up on the set review, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to catch future content, including an archetype guide, draft videos, and more about this format, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching.